The origins of the Renaissance are generally believed to lie in Italy, where a renewed interest in the classics had a huge impact on art and culture. But the foundations of the Renaissance were laid much earlier, and not in Italy, but in a town called Toledo in Islamic Spain. Toledo was one of Al-Andalus's vulnerable city-states, and in 1085 the Christians seized control of it. Unusually, the handover went very smoothly, and as a result the Muslims already living in Toledo were allowed to remain as citizens and their mosques were left untouched. The city that emerged accommodated both Muslim and Christian.
Spain at this time is a paradox. On one hand, tensions between Muslims and Christians are becoming unbearable, and yet on the other, there is a hugely beneficial intellectual evolution that is only possible because Muslims and Christians are living side by side.
When Toledo fell to the Christians, its doors were opened to travellers and intellectuals from all over Europe. These people mixed with the Muslims in the city, learning their language and reading their books. Many of the adventurers came from England.
In the late 1100s, an Englishman known as Daniel of Morley travelled to Europe to study. But as his autobiography reveals, he was disgusted with what he found there. I stopped a while in Paris, and there I saw asses rather than men, pretending to be very important. They had desks in front of them, heaving under the weight of 2 or 3 immovable tomes, but because they did not know anything, they were no better than marble statues. I did not want to get infected by a similar petrifaction, but when I heard that the doctrine of the Arabs was in fashion in Toledo, I hurried there as quickly as I could so that I could hear the wisest philosophers in the world.
And here we have the preface in red. That's where we learn about the process of translation. In this case, we read that this book was translated by Gerard of Cremona. It is a medical treatise by Ibn Sina, by Avicenna, and it was translated ab Arabico, from Arabic, in Latinum, into Latin, in Toledo.
Yeah, it's a very rich document, isn't it? You get a sense of how valued these things were.
And there is all these little glosses on the right-hand side. People have been adding comments or explaining words that were not clear. Un momento, por favor. Vamos a...
Wow, it's a splendid beast of a thing. Is this it looks like it's a work of Aristotle, is it?
Yeah, this is the Rhetorica by Aristotle. Rhetorica Aristotelis.
And here we are, look, here's the man who's working on it. Hermanus Alemanus.
Yeah, Herman the German.
Herman the German.
Yeah, even Germans came all the way to Toledo to find all these texts. And in this case, it is a commentary by Averroes on the text of Aristotle. Ah. And both are translated together.
So it's got added value because you've got new Arabic thought coming into the classical text.
Yeah, they are adding, they are supplementing, they are completing what was transmitted from the ancient world.
Knowledge really is power at this time in history.
It is. Having a book was something very, very valuable.
Do you find during this process that words slip from one language to another?
Absolutely. Chemia, that word came into Western languages as chemistry. But we have another word, alchemy, that comes originally from Greek through Arabic. They added the article in Arabic, al, and that gave alchemy.
English is full of words which came into the language from Arabic in this way. Many of them describe mathematical concepts which were completely new to Europe.
Algorithms are named after an Arabic mathematician, and the concept of zero comes from the Arabic sifr, which means empty. It's where we get our word cipher from. But of course, the most obvious and lasting impact is the use of Arabic numerals. And in this Spanish-Latin text, which dates from around about 986 AD, we have the first example of Arabic numerals written in Europe. Here they are. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Imagine trying to do something like multiplication with Roman numerals. Once the numbers get above a certain amount, they are ridiculously unwieldy. This new, agile numerical system made everyday things like bookkeeping and accounting more accessible. Mathematics developed, and the construction of complex architectural projects became much easier. Recently, archaeologists renovating the roof timbers of Salisbury Cathedral in England made a discovery which clarifies this story.
On some of the beams that support the roof, there are a series of numbers that were carved in around 1200 AD when the cathedral was built. Now, that's a 3, and obviously it's familiar to us today, but in its time, it was a curious and progressive symbol.
At this time, everyone in England was still using the clunky old Roman numerals, but here in the rafters of one cathedral, a new trend appears to have caught on.
These numbers, the numbers that we use today, the fact that they're here is proof that the ordinary craftsmen who carved them benefited from an explosion of knowledge that started in Arabia and spread through Europe via Islamic Spain.
And the travellers from Toledo brought more than just practical knowledge back to England.
After a number of years, Daniel of Morley returned from Toledo, his cases crammed with documents and volumes. And when he arrived in England, he made an appointment to hand this precious booty over to his patron, who was a bishop. This benefactor was one of a team of scholars who wanted to establish their town as a centre of learning. And the name of the town was Oxford.
The universities that were founded in Paris, Bologna and Oxford at this time based their new curriculum on the radical ideas which were pouring out of Toledo.
One of Daniel of Morley's compatriots
developed a massive program of translations in which they translated from Greek into Arabic everything that had reached them. And this was something that was promoted by the whole society. And the result of this is that they translated practically all Greek knowledge. There's the first period in which they translate and they learn, they assimilate. Later, they had learned enough and they began to produce original works by themselves and to criticize Greek science. And of course, one cannot say that the Arabs were mere transmitters of Greek science. They were the people that continued the work of Greek scientists until they led all this research into a final crisis. And this final crisis was the crisis that brought the Renaissance and the scientific revolution. If they had not done this, Renaissance and scientific revolution would have been impossible.
It would take time for these groundbreaking ideas to become assimilated into Christian Europe. But once they were, Western intellect was transformed. The works of Aristotle were taught in the new universities. The medical treatises of Avicenna were used in hospitals. And Arabic translations of Greek geometry and those new Arabic numerals were passed on to craftsmen and architects. This was a critical stage in the growth of Western thought. We should no longer see the Renaissance as a rebirth, but the continuation of an intellectual movement which had been nourished centuries earlier by Muslims.
The Italian Renaissance is famous for reviving classical learning, but in fact what's happening here 400 years earlier seems to be just as vital. Do you think that Muslim scholars aren't given due credit for what they're doing in Islamic Spain at this time?
It is not something that you would learn about in school, probably, or even at university. It was probably conscious process of neglect, and now we are still suffering from that.
Extremely selective history writing.
That's right. It is due to the conflict that existed between the two worlds